evening, Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to Friday evening's edition of Plain Talk, an exciting edition. I might add, I'm joined by two powerful minds on the issues that we want to touch on tonight: constitutional reform specifically, the issue of proportional representation. We want to deal with the issues of, do all our votes count? Does our system make sense to everybody? Joining me tonight, former Senate President and well-known attorney at law, Timothy Hamel-Smith. Good evening, Tim.
Thank you, Philip.
And we're joined again by Seereeram. I'm sure you're all getting to know him very well now. He's a former banker, Scotia banker, former senator. He's a former managing director at Citicorp. Welcome back, Dave.
Yeah, thank you. And hello, Timothy. A long time we haven't seen and spoken.
Yes. And hello to your viewers, Philip.
Yes, thanks a lot for that. When I called you earlier this week, it was to ask you simply because Ved and I had done a show last week, and one of the issues that came up was the issue of the lack of representation for a large cross-section of people. You call it 30%, he called it 50%. The reality of the situation is a lot of people are not represented in our current system, and if you could take a minute to explain why that might be so.
All right. I mean, democracy really relates to how we all are represented in the parliament by our government, and each of us, that is the mechanism by which we have some say in the affairs of the country. So if you look back, it's been growing many years, but if you look back to 1980, you will see the ONR were there. People don't realize they won at 23%. The raw number was less than today. If you look back at 1991, the NAR were fighting, but really you were NAR rump in Trinidad. They also won 23% of the vote. And then, of course, you come up to when the COP entered, you will find that they likewise had a 23% vote. I put it at 23%. But I have no doubt there are more people than that. And it is because they feel that their vote doesn't count. They perhaps are staying at home. And while Wade would put it at 50 and I put it at 30, but what we know is the minimum votes outside there, what you might call the independent vote, is at least 23%. And certainly, closer to 30 and more.
Wade, you might as well weigh in here your version or your opinion as to what Tim said, so that we could start to get down into the meat of this issue, and a lot of people who are going to be paying attention to the show tonight, they're very interested in this issue, because we all know that Trinidad and Tobago have been playing a kind of seesaw politics for a very long time, and it has not worked for us. And we think that the side that is waiting in the wings is not necessarily the best among us, but there seems to be no way to bring something else into the conversation. Weigh in on what Timothy was saying.
Yeah, precisely that point, because what I understand Timothy is saying is that that's a problem definition. So if we agree on the problem, we could amplify on it and perhaps fine-tune it and so on. Once we agree on a problem, we can look at throwing some solutions on options on the table and discuss it in detail to see how to go forward. But this is precisely the point. This is not democracy. If you have just two parties, you have a third party who's getting 33% of the votes, but not only the votes, but what about the persons who don't vote? So therefore we have to also look, as in some countries, that make it mandatory according to the constitution, you must go and vote. In other words, we are all participating in this. And when you must put on your seatbelt, believe me, you do it automatically. You know you have to vote, you're going to vote. So it means to say, let us increase the participation of the voting population. Let's increase it, and secondly, let us make sure that we give each voter a say with regards to running of the government, and that is where the proportional representation could try and address that second issue.
Timothy said to me in the same conversation I referred to earlier, and I had asked him a simple question offhand. Why was the country broken up into 41 constituencies? Why this arbitrary 35,000 constituents per constituency number? And he said to me, there's no rule. It could be 10,000 people per constituency. We could have 140 constituencies. And maybe if the constituencies were greater in number and the amount of constituents to make up a constituency was smaller, it would be harder to vote a pad. What say you?
You know, where you
Well,
really start, I think the starting point is how do you make an effective, functional parliament? Because, you know, the question of voting is to appoint, to vote your representatives into parliament. What are the functions of parliament? So you have a government on the one side and opposition on the other. And the function is to have oversight of the executive. That is a critical function. And if you look back at what people have said, we're a small country, given that. But that doesn't mean the functions diminish because the number of electorate are less. It does mean that, one, you need enough people to populate the committees. And not what we have right now is because we are somewhat better than we were, you know, a number of 5 years ago. Because the committee system, I think people will say, is working better. But what very often happens is there are so few in number of people who are not forming part of the executive that one of two things happen. The executive act committee that is to have oversight of themselves, which is ridiculous. And what you have is a number of committee members sitting on a number of committees. And as a result, you often find these committees are adjourned, are not available to do the work, and then we don't have whole-time parliamentarians. So if you're not a whole-time parliamentarian, and the executives tend to be the only whole-time people employed, you are going to look for your source of income somewhere else. And therefore, Parliament suffers as a result. We really need, if you considered how many parliamentarians you needed, you need at least, it is suggested, way back in New Zealand, that you need about 100 parliamentarians in order to have an effective political oversight of the governance and executive.
Speaking as you did just now about the function of members of parliament who also end up in the executive, they have no time, and especially those who end up with multiples of roles in the executive, they have little or no time for the actual constituency. Are you suggesting separating the executive from the legislature?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, that is one way to go, and you'll go the presidential way. But I certainly think that committees should not be comprised of members of the executive, number one. So they should not be participating. They should be called to account. And the committees, you need sufficient numbers to function properly. There are times when these committees do function, and when they do call to account people, and we've seen that in the recent past, and that has a lot to do with when we change the standing orders. But by and large, you're not finding the kind of vote that we would expect from a parliament. We really have, you know, in many ways, it's just a charade. We have everything that looks like a parliament, but it doesn't function as an effective and efficient parliament of the few numbers, the insufficient numbers, because the full-time parliamentarians, and therefore they're not able to give the amount of time that it generates. As a result, the country suffers because we're not getting the governance that we should expect from out of our parliament. And go to elections, when you ask how many constituencies should you have, parliamentarians is directly relevant to constituencies, which takes you back to Ved's suggestion about proportional representation, because you could have half your parliament as representatives, just as we have now, and the other half elected by way of proportion in terms of the percentage of votes that each party has won. And that, I think would be a far more efficient, effective parliament resulting from that, and a result, better governance, I think, that we could expect from our country.
Ved, last time you were here, you spoke about starting proportional representation in the Senate, and that is why I wanted to bring Timothy to answer that, because I couldn't. So if you could make that suggestion
Yeah,
again,
sure.
let
Yeah,
me hear his take on that.
yeah. I don't subscribe to revolutionary overhaul of a system, but rather incremental, and make it in such a way that all the population can understand. And if you put it to a vote to the population, to the opposition, to all political parties, and ask them, because at the end of the day, a democracy should represent the will of the people. And if we put a structure forward to them that they all agree with, there's no basis for objection, then we can say, okay, let's move forward with it rather quickly. And that's why I'm saying that if a political party puts that on the manifesto and come to the population, it will be a tremendous attraction for the population. And let me propose. Let me put forward what I propose. Now, let me also state at the same time, I'm not a political scientist. I've never, I've never really got myself involved in the politics and so on. So I saw a saying of a gentleman today, a scientist actually. He said, those who are least educated have the broadest mind. So my mind is free. It's not fettered at the moment, right? So I could be totally wrong, and you can kick me off the show if you don't find it makes sense. All I'm saying
Sati,
is,
stand by. Sati, stand by.
Sati, stand by. I'm saying we have 41 seats, right, for the lower house. I say leave that as it is. Don't interfere with that. Based on the number of votes the parties now get, we are saying they'll be represented. Once you get more than 5%, they'll be represented now. They have a choice now of choosing the senators. So, if, for example, when COP, Timothy, you recall what percentage they got in the last
23%.
election? Sorry, 23. Right.
Yes.
So, closer to 25. So, 25% means to say that they would have had 25% of the senators in the upper house. And it's a very simple thing. There's no maths in it. So we all have to say, okay, put that forward to the population and say, guys, do you all agree with it? And if everyone agrees, let's get it done. We don't have any plebiscite and thing at the moment, but we can probably sign a petition and put it towards to the president. But you know far better than me what the procedures might be. So I'm saying,
So, that's
yeah,
one question. So the government could be outnumbered in the Senate.
of
How
course,
would that
of course.
augur in such a hyper political environment? How would that augur for the passing of laws?
Right, because now, let's say a government wants a particular law, and so in the lower house they pass it. The lower house they pass it, but I'm asking for my edification. Does it also have to be passed by the upper house to go to the president? Right. So this
Yes,
becomes
except for financial bills, but by and large, that's correct.
well, I think financial bills should be included because they make a mess of it. So that's a simpler one to do. Maybe put that before the Senate, but not the Senate as so constructed. Because the Senate as so constructed, in my view, there's nothing like an independent senator. If we want to fool ourselves and continue fooling ourselves for the next 10 years, we are free to do so.
You say so. If you say that, right, in an environment not one that puts the government in a minority position, if you know that as an absolute fact, then where are we going to make up these minds that are going to create this Senate that you want? Because all I am seeing is, to me, and I'm not just knocking it out of hand, but it sounds like a prescription for logjam, because it sounds like, okay, you pass it in the House, but we blocking it in the Senate, and every vote
Well,
going to be
well,
politicized.
okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Timothy,
You
we
need to
already know.
ask yourself another question, you know. I think the assumption that if you did the Senate by proportional representation, that the government would in fact come out of the parliament, come out of the lower house. But I don't see why that has to be so. I think that the party, the person who holds the support of the majority of the parliament, in that context, both Senate and House, is who should become the prime minister and be called upon to form the executive. So that creates, Philip, a different dynamic in terms of, you know, blocking and stuff like that, because you really want to get a majority made up of people both from the House and the Senate. It's not as if the Senate is an elected Senate in Vid's proposition, and they should therefore be one of the determinants in determining who forms the executive.
then shouldn't the better question to start from the, what is the purpose of the Senate now? What is the purpose of the Senate we want it to be? And then design it to suit that purpose.
Yeah, and that's a very good question. I am not sure in a small country like ours that it is worthwhile. I like the idea of having independent senators, so providing, of course, they're independent. There are some concerns about that. So there may be different mechanisms for determining your independent senators to make sure they're independent. If you had, what happens right now is you have a lower house in a small country with a small budget, whose budget is shrinking, and you now have to have two houses, one in which you review legislation, and then you go to another house to review the same legislation. That might be fine for some, you know, mega country when you have 200 million in the United States and 60 million in the UK. We have 1.5 million. In New Zealand, with 4 million, which is far closer to our numbers, they decided to have one house. And I'm suggesting that maybe because I believe the value of independent senators bring to our politics, we can find a mechanism for bringing those independent senators within the lower house, and therefore contributing in much the same way. I know Ved talks about independence, but you watch when there's anything critical going on in this country, people look to the independent senators to save the country. That's the words they use. So they do have a function, and I wouldn't like to lose that function. What perhaps you don't even realize right now, Philip, is that the Senate structured as it is, creates a built-in deadlock, you know.
Yes.
And because you have a deadlock, the president of the Senate has a casting vote, but is usually expected to cast it for the status quo. You require, in all circumstances, for a government to pass legislation, generally speaking, to get one independent senator to vote with them for a simple majority. We actually have a built-in deadlock, which is a very good, I think, approach that has been made. But I think you can do the same thing and replicate it in a single house at less expense, much more efficiently and effectively, because it would be far more time effective rather than have two separate sit-ins.
But do you think that the oversight the Senate provides is critical to the democracy?
It is. Right now, as we function, I think I'm not sure that anybody but the independent senators really provide that overview. Though we do tend to find people of less political, that feel bound by their political party. But I'm not sure. The truth is, if you look back over voting, people vote with party. The independents do vote as they think appropriate to the circumstances. Yes, please.
Yeah. Timothy, I think the idea of one house is excellent because I think our government is too big, much too big. 41 to govern a small country with today's technology. When we had to travel by donkey cart from Port of Spain to Point Forting and so on, you need to what you call have people in the field. But now with technology, you can link up. Look how we are linking up and we're discussing a major ideas, or we are able to make decisions a lot faster. And if you notice, all the multinationals, they have taken away decision making from the field. If you look at Amoco or BP or so, they've taken away all those decisions and they've centralized it because of technology. And I think we need to re-examine that. Our cost of governance is much too high, and every time you put a senator or a member of parliament in place, it calls for so many support staff and so on. And to my knowledge, they are not in the productive sector, in that they are not making anything, they are not growing anything, but they are facilitating the movement of ideas and so on. But
If
yeah,
says, as a former Senate president, that the Senate does in fact provide critical oversight to the House, which is a very political animal, I'd like to ask a question. Have we ever entertained the idea of making the entire Senate the independent bench? Nothing from the government, nothing from the opposition, just oversight. Independent citizens, patriots, however you identify who should serve and how. It doesn't need then to be any critical number to say you have this many from that one and that many. It could be a number like 7, so the tie automatically breaks. Timothy, why not look at something like that as opposed to the government putting a bench and the opposition putting a bench and then we're looking for a tie-break bench? Why not just create
Well,
an
so you have to find a mechanism. Democracy is about allowing people to vote. I mean, that is the very root of democracy. And therefore, I'm fearful of taking that away altogether and putting the right to appoint people in, that becomes like the nominated legislature, the LegCo that we had, pre-independence. That's what people will say. But I am in favor of having an elected Senate. If you want to keep the Senate, I'd much prefer to do away with the Senate, have a single house, be more efficient and effective. I do think we need a certain critical number of people in order to make the committee system work. I agree with Wade that technology could perhaps, in fact, impact on the numbers required. We need to get the technology right. You're going to emerge from this COVID situation with far many new ideas. It's going to be a new world. Technology will lead it in many ways, as we're doing here today, but we have to get even better. I can't see any reason why we don't have a virtual parliament right now. Why do we have to go and sit in the house to have parliament when we could function and everybody, like we are doing right now,
But you just said,
tuned what is functioning.
Timothy, you just said that democracy works best when the people vote the office holders into office. So the Senate is not really voted into office. So why not? Because I really want to pursue that issue here because I like Vade's idea. But then you said that the purpose of the Senate has to be oversight, and that's a critical issue.
No, it's not
Why
just the Senate. It's the whole parliament has oversight. Sorry, I shouldn't just say.
depoliticize the Senate?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Would have to work out a mechanism where your country as a whole felt that the manner in which these senators were appointed, represented a democratic function. And it's hard to beat the ballot box when that is concerned. My concern is that when you create an electoral system in which you disenfranchise up to 30%, 50%, says Ved, of your population, that's no longer democracy. That's the problem we're facing.
how would your version of proportional representation work, and what would it accomplish?
All right. So if you had, for instance, I'm not saying it has to be that way, but if you had a single house, representatives exactly, and you would vote exactly as now for your representatives, people like the idea of having a rep in their constituency. That's part of our culture, as it were. We shouldn't lose that. But then you can have equal number of persons who have voted based on the proportion percentage of the, the electorate have voted for each party. So the same ballot paper, you will have two votes, one for the candidate of your constituency and one to indicate which party you want to vote for. And at the end of the day, the proportional representation, the percentage votes that X party gets means they get X number in the House. And you could have people, the complaint barely, the one that I found most is to suggest that proportional representation in a fragmented parliament with a number of very small parties and therefore not executive government. But that's simply a matter of saying minimum percentage. In order to gain one seat in the House, you have to meet a minimum threshold of, let's say, 10%. Later on, we could decide how to shuffle that, but you could start off with 10%. I certainly think when 12% of your population is represented in Parliament, because the part of those seats, that you don't have a democracy anymore. Exactly why in New Zealand, in the early 90s, created a commission. The party that won established a commission. The party won 12% of the vote and got no. They recognized that that was not democracy. You cannot put 12%, exclude them from of participation, of having representatives and causing. And here in Trinidad, we know we've reached, that is beyond doubt.
This is
We
more
could be
rural.
as high as 30, and I mean, therefore, you do not have fair representation. And then you ask, why don't we have better representation? But if in fact you exclude 30% of your population from participating, you can expect just in a small, just less, which has a small pool of talented people, you can have even less numbers available for your parliament. We just have created a nonsense.
Because,
Yes.
because I just want to say this, right? I have watched Archbishop Barbara Burke negotiate her flock forward through Basdeo Pandey, and now clearly this money she got for the cathedral from the PNM, and I mean it's literally horse trading your vote. That is what you're left to do if you cannot rely on the system to represent you. That's what you're saying, right, Timothy? Basically, in a
That's
nutshell.
and that's what makes up politics: dishonesty, corruption. But it all open like that. So there will be people who say, look, I have no place in the politics, and therefore let me make my money to talk. There will be people who say, like Barbara Burke, well, I have an important segment of the population who support her. If you want to win, I can make demands. And we have, I don't think the interest of Trinidad and Tobago as a whole is being catered for. And therefore you have special able to, and it's not just unique to Trinidad, in every country, special interest seeking to get through law, own particular, something to benefit themselves. Somebody has to decide, will list ultimately is just for one small segment of the population.
Yeah. Let me
Wait,
come
yeah,
in at,
yeah, come here.
yeah. I have no problem what Timothy is saying. And what I would like to suggest is that you look at the evolution of proportional representation, an evolution. When you're looking at an evolution, whatever the first stage is, it has to be very simple for the normal person to understand and see the sense in it. And that is why I say a problem definition at this stage is to increase participation and to ensure that those who participate in the voting is that they feel a part of the system and represented.
And every vote counts.
And every vote counts. So I'm saying for the moment, if we can develop this and put it towards the population, we don't have to wait. We can get a vote from the population regardless of whether it's recognized by the constitution or not. We can get a vote, and then you can move from there. So we are asking everyone, the citizens in Trinidad, if they would agree for the first stage of proportional representation, leave the current system at the lower house as is. Leave that system as is. However, you are free to engage and form any political party, the Farmers Party, the oil, I don't know if that is still valid, but any interest group can form a party so that they do not feel confined to go under the traditional parties. Because there are many persons in Trinidad who are very upset with the PNM and they're very upset with the UNC. So if you want
And
to
are
form
very
another,
vocal, and are very vocal and politically active and feel
right,
left out.
but Philip, they have nowhere to go. If they know, however, that even you form a party for this next election and you get a 5% vote, that you have a representative at the upper house. Now, the question of horse trading, you're not going to eradicate that altogether. But let's say, as in the case with the COP, if they got 25%, so they will have a 25% representative of the senators. And the beauty about the appointment of the senators, the political party can actually choose what I would call the professionals in the field, and like in Roman Senate, who are independent, who are not groveling for money, or who are not. So they are less inclined. They are less inclined to be subject to horse trading, and more inclined to be looking at this thing on a national interest. Now, I'm not saying it would not prevent let's say the political parties and the lower house to try to influence and negotiate. That will go on. That goes on in any case. So I'm saying, let's look at the evolution of uh, proportional representation and see what is the best way to go forward. But once we agree on a definition, a problem definition, and the problem definition is bring about participation. So that is the first step.
As always have to ask you, Vade, when you say we and then you go on, you leave a gap and you don't explain who that we is. You just refer to what I have to assume is a referendum. But we don't have referendum in Trinidad and Tobago. So it doesn't instruct the
No, no,
parliament.
no,
And
no, no.
so who would be motivated? Who takes up this challenge to go and
Right,
educate 1.4 million people to understand that our system doesn't work and it should work better? Who does
right.
that?
Uh,
Again,
Let
you're
me.
going to have I'm going,
I've been
I just
trained to say we, I've been trained to say we, and not I. Let me explain that to you. Democracy cannot exist with a sea of ignorance. We all pat ourselves on the back and we say we are very, what you call, educated and all of that. So education, that's a good start. But education doesn't mean to say we are intellectually smart or bright, or we have the capacity to sift the truth from the non-truth. But I am assuming if you explain, when I say you, meaning to say any political party can explain this and be part of the program for the next election, I'm saying that is going to attract votes. That's all I'm saying. And I continue to say we because I'm part of this citizenry, and I'm not going to move. You'll have to shoot me for me to move from Trinidad, and then I'll still be here, either in ashes or 6 feet down. So I'm not going anywhere, right? So the we are talking about, when I mention that, I believe that Trinidadians, the citizens of this country, are not stupid. They have the capacity to understand. If they see any proposal put before them that will impact on their own goodwill and their own standard of living and their own quality of life, I believe with persuasion, many persons they develop ideas, and when people ignore them, they drop it and run. But these
But
are ideas are eternal, and they should be pursued.
and I want to say that this idea that came out in the conversation with Timothy yesterday about expanding the House of Representatives, I think that is the best way to fix this, and the easiest sell to the constituents is that if your constituency is smaller, you have a greater chance of getting representation from your representative. You have a greater chance of getting to see them. Because if you have 140 seats and the government wins with 50 seats, they have no way they're giving 50 ministries. So there are going to be some members of parliament that are going to have the time to see their constituents. But more importantly, all of those that are not in the executive, they get to see their member of parliament and get that kind of representation. And perhaps we get the conversation back in the parliament about what is really going on the ground.
Yeah,
Um, with that,
as you say
yeah, go ahead.
that, Philip, it is one of the things I've always found. We have actually set up our system for failure because no person, all right, is going to be able to function as a minister, as a member of cabinet, as a parliamentarian, as a committee member, as a representative of his constituency, attend to party affairs. If you're going to split yourself into those seven parts, either going to fail at all or you're going to perform in one and the others will fail. We set it up for failure. We have to find a new system that allows far better. All of those functions are important functions. They have to be attended to. But we can't impose them upon one person. And that's what we've done. We set up a system.
They're all demanding. I remember I had asked of Prakash Ramadan, and I said, you were the leader of the Congress of the People, you were the Minister of Legal Affairs, you were the Member of Parliament for St. Augustine, and you were put in charge of something as important as constitutional reform. If you remember that, he was touring the country. And I asked him, and you were also the head of a young family. How were you getting time to make all of those responsibilities? That point is clear, that a member of parliament should be a full-time responsibility. The first time I heard that we should consider separating the House of Representatives, the legislature, from the executive, I thought that was such a no-brainer. That should automatically be so. Let the House of Representatives represent their people and function as oversight for the executive.
Could I let me come in here? I think we have to decide. One is what future Trinidad will have in terms of financial capability. Secondly, we have to decide: do we want a larger administration or a smaller administration? So those are fundamental issues to be decided upon. Second, the third point: if you decide to expand the administration, we want to retain it within the budget, much lower budget than today. So would they be able to take a 50% salary cut? So we have to look at the financial part of this as well. Administration. Right now we are top heavy. Very few workers in Trinidad, very few workers in Trinidad, and the administration and the service sector, which is secondary to any economy, is too huge. So we are on an upside down pyramid, and which we cannot sustain it anymore. We cannot sustain it, believe me.
If politics hasn't managed to get it right, finances will ultimately pressure us into getting.
So that's why
We broke up badly. We didn't get that. Say it again.
I was saying that over the last 50 years, we have not been able to get the politics right. but maybe the lack of finances may in fact
Before,
impose upon us a solution better than we now have, and what is more effective, efficient, and less costly. And of course,
That's good.
technology plays a part in it.
are you one of those people that's looking for a silver lining in coronavirus that's saying that
But
all of
of course, there is, there is, in fact, it is, the truth is, people can be raised to their greatest heights when they face challenges. If life is easy, you get fat, slothful, but you are pressured by your financial circumstances, then in fact you start to innovate, which is what we really need, and we start to think in terms of how is this serving the people, and how is it could it become more efficient and effective to accomplish the goals that we set.
so, Timothy, Vade, we have a president, a prime minister, a cabinet, a parliament, we have local government, the Senate. Do you think that we have too much government in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, certainly we have, this thing. What happens is we create too many ministries to begin with. We shouldn't function with more than 12 or 15 ministries.
Vade,
I don't know how more than 12 or 15 people could sit around a table and really be a decision making body. I have difficulties with achieving that. And therefore, you need a collective of maybe a cabinet of 12. It doesn't mean that there are not positions for other people, but your core decision making body has to be far more slim and, carry out the executive functions that they're required to
so, but
do in order to make the state work.
in a country this small, I mean, tourism should be a department of tourism, not a ministry of tourism. Sport should be a department of sport, and those could be all functions of either the prime minister's office or social development. I have always thought the most important ministry in a government should be social development and management, because without social development and management, you have no real reason for government in the first place. Everything else, finance and national security, yes, those things matter. But without people in a country, you don't need a government. The social development and management is the most important thing. Education is a function of social development and management. National security is a function of social development and management, the penal system, the justice system, how we deal with all of those things. So we should be looking at those types of things. But we have no rules. We had a government that had the largest parliament in the Commonwealth was a Trinidad, the largest cabinet in the Commonwealth was a Trinidad government. I'm not naming any names, I'm just saying.
Well, we need to justify it by perhaps capturing a few countries around us. But being serious, I think our government is just too large, much too
That was,
large. Civil
that was your
servants are
first
much
question.
too large.
And the bureaucracy is bloated.
But coming back to the original problem, so we agree the problem is that there's not much participation. I think 50 or 60% might be in terms of voters, and we are leaving out 50 and to 40% out of the system. So let's address that by make it mandatory that you must vote. Very simple. Put on your seatbelt. You just go and vote.
They won't like
So
that. They won't like that. They won't like that.
not a question of liking.
They will
But,
hire Anna Ramlogan to sue you and say you can't force me to vote.
well, let's deal with obstacles as we go. But I'm just suggesting something. Let's not create the obstacles before we even start. Let's agree on a plan. And this is my
But
suggestion. I'm not
we can have
obviously just
electronic voting, Will.
well
There's
something.
no
But
reason
that's
to leave your home to vote.
You get
Timothy. Look,
electronic voting, Wade, if you get electronic voting, voting will reach up in the high 90 percentile because people wouldn't have to wake up, dress, and go and line up in a schoolyard. They're going to sit down home, they're going to punch in the code, and they're going to vote. So people will
Well,
get
Philip,
involved. It's a fantastic suggestion, Timothy,
Philip,
and I hope we get
Philip,
there.
your knowledge of IT is far greater than mine. I'm still a pen and paper person, but you have just solved your own problem.
Yeah, well,
You've just
Estonia
solved.
has done it, we can.
Right. So I'm saying we need to step up the voting process, right? Then, if you have a greater number of options with regards to parties to vote, that will make a big difference. So, at
So
the end of the, go
what
ahead.
does your forced voting solve? What problem does it solve?
Because there are many persons in Trinidad, they don't like the two parties and they just stay home. They just stay
Forcing them to
home.
vote, forcing them to vote among the two parties will help out.
Not
Yeah,
the
but
no, no,
I think
hold on.
really
No, no. Sorry, Timothy, go ahead. I'll
yeah,
address that
I
point.
think underlying what Ved is saying, people are really staying home because they say my vote is wasted. I
That is
cannot
correct.
get the rep, no matter, and that's what the experience in the past has shown. It wasted a number of different ways. If I'm in a, because we are trying, if I'm in a heavy PNM constituency, maybe I as a PNM may say, well, they don't need my vote really. And if
That
I'm
is
a
true.
UNC, I will say, well, I wasted my time to vote, and vice versa
That
constituency. And
that
therefore,
is correct.
there's no incentive to go out and vote except in the marginal constituencies. And the
I
And
marginal
we,
constituencies determine our government.
I said when trying to remember this guy's name now, who was in Lavantil West. I said to him, I said, marginalize your constituency. You will see work overnight. You will see government. You will see opposition. Marginalize Lavantil East and Lavantil West, and they will develop overnight. But that again is
Philip,
a correct point. The issue of the two-party system, the fact that people feel, Timothy Vade, you said you're not political, but you're a former senator, but Timothy has been on the ground in the engine room trying to rebuild and trying with every opportunity he gets. And I've seen that we create some new vehicles, some new alternatives, something that gives people another option. And the biggest obstacle, the voters themselves, because everybody tells you, boy, no matter what you do, election day, they're going to get in the section, they're going to vote PNM, they're going to vote UNC. And the people themselves are so jaded with the process that that one thing, if they could be made to feel that their vote mattered, how would you do that? How would you get them to that place?
right. Okay, let me, we're going back to the problem definition. I think we have defined that very well. It's to get up participation and let the voter know his vote counts. And I'm
Because you
saying
get
don't
a
revel
percentage of your vote.
exactly, and I'm saying host that vote in the Senate rather than the lower house,
I hear you.
because you don't want to revolutionize the whole thing. That will, once you start revolutionizing the change in our administration, it's going to take another 25, 30 years to do, if it's just an incremental change that makes sense to everybody and simple to implement, that is very crucial. Simple to understand and simple to implement. Those are the
That is,
keywords.
that
Those
is
are the
crucial.
keywords that are crucial.
Throw up one more thing just to put the cat among the pigeons, because a voting system that has more proportionality with it. So, you put first past the post on one extreme and you put proportional representative, pure proportional representative on the other. But there are mid systems. And what I can tell you is that you have middle of the way systems that you could introduce into our constitution with a simple majority. Because remember, when we go for the PR to make dramatic changes, each of those require a majority. And because of that, when you talk constitutional change, people turn off. because they say it is no way that any party will have a three-fifths or three-quarter majority to achieve it.
Mhm.
But I'm suggesting to you that there's a halfway point, if you like, that is produces more proportionality, is what the science says, and yet can be done with a simple majority. So right now, what we have in our constitution, we say that the electoral system shall be first past the post. And you can change those words by saying the electoral system shall be by way of preferential voting. And I'll tell you how preferential voting works. You
PNM,
have it in Australia.
PNM
I
and
didn't hear
UNC
you.
support PNM and UNC supporters not going to like that at all.
Well, that's why they don't like PR either. But in fact is that you would then simply rank each of the candidates in the constituency just as you do now, but you rank them one, two, three. And when you collate all the votes, then votes are added to the person in the first place. The last person drops out, and the votes that came to the second, that were they placed second, would then be attributed to whoever got the second vote. So a little more difficult. It's no more difficult to vote. It is a little more difficult to count. And hopefully we're not like Guyana where they don't know how to count. But it is not. It's not rocket science. Australia has that system of preferential, which brings about better proportionality, not perfect, but better proportionality. So that could be an interim step. Veda's made the point. Sometimes we can't get a dramatic change, but we have to move by degrees. And the first step might, in fact, be to introduce preferential voting, which would produce a measure of proportionality and have more incentive for me to vote, because every vote counts.
The 25% that you speak about is 25% of the votes casted, right?
Correct, correct.
What
That's right.
percentage of votes casted represents the people eligible to vote?
Well, our voting tends to be around 60%, 57%, 63%. So there are, and that's why Wade gets his 50%. He said
No problem.
40% of people are staying home and not voting.
I want to make a point. If you have 60% for ease of arithmetic, if you have 60% of the people that are eligible to vote voting, and then of that new 100%, which is 60%, a party like a third party gets 25% of the vote. The other two parties roughly share 35% of the votes each. We never have a majority government. Our government is always speaking for an absolute minority of the people. Yes?
That's right. That's right. And what I'm suggesting to you, you will have to get more than 50% in each constituency to become the winner of that constituency.
And if
So
you
at
don't
least
vote
you will
hard enough,
feel, pardon?
if you
No,
don't get
you actually have to attain. I mean, obviously, if you only have two people in a, so somebody must get more than 50%. When you split different ways, then you keep going until you're down to two. And then somebody must come up with more than 50%. And it's not like what the UNC had put forward, where you have a second set of voting taking place, as they just had in the THA in Tobago. This is one time, one vote, and your voting mechanism allows you to count the vote, and everybody's vote counts.
so the bottom votes of the third and fourth parties, they just get struck off.
What they do, if I voted, it's not for the party, I'm voting for a candidate. If I voted for the fourth place candidate, right, then my vote there, I also would have indicated which of the other parties was my second choice.
Okay, right.
And then my second choice vote will go to the party that I voted for as my second choice.
So if your candidate that you voted for is not in the top two in the running, they've been struck off, your second choice vote now gets counted.
Correct. Exactly.
Good.
And it's given to the second party. So when it first comes out, very often it's not the person who got the majority of votes in the first place that comes out winning. But when you accumulate and aggregate all these votes, it becomes a much more proportional system of voting.
It makes some sense. Vade, what you think?
Well, I've just asked the clarification request for. So if a party, because I suppose let's assume no independent party person goes up. Suppose a party gets, let's say, 25% of the votes, but no representative at the constituents. What happens then?
Yeah, so it is possible for that to happen.
Right. So that's what I'm saying.
If we met off air and we looked at some practical ways how you think this might work, I will be able to demonstrate to you. We don't have enough time here to demonstrate to you how, in fact, somebody who was a third party could, in fact, become the first party.
And
under
form the
this,
government.
you understand? Right now, today, I'm not saying 4 months, but he would be at least represented in Parliament. And you need my vote in order to become the executive. You are going to come on to me and we will negotiate. I will put forward my policy position at that point, and you need me to keep governing.
Okay. Going forward from here, the question has to be, how do we initiate this as a conversation on a national level? And how do we get the Parliament to respect the will of the people if we get this conversation on a national level?
The politicians only listen to votes count. And if they feel that the electorate or their section of the electorate wants something, then they will more likely support it. It is for people like you, Philip, with you broadcast across the nation, to permeate these ideas through the nation, to carry out this educational process. And yes, I mean, Stephen Cadiz had an electronic poll in which large percentage of people to vote as to what they wanted in a particular situation. There's no reason why we couldn't have such a vote electronically. In no time in history have we been more capable of getting participation right through a broad set of people, as opposed to merely having a handful of people telling us what to do, where we are going, and how things should be. And we, in fact, have a better opportunity than any time in the history to create that.
Both of your suggestions, if you put it together, is actually a fantastic solution. Your preferential voting and your mandatory voting means that you will actually end up with the will of the cross-section of voters who vote, and you will know, you'll be able to be guided.
I think so. It's a win-win situation.
It sounds very much like that. But then the 40% of the people who don't vote, that have all the power in the country, who just leave it lying there, how do we get them to realize that the counterbalance in a conversation like this is them?
Yeah, and when they come to right now, they feel their vote does not count. It doesn't matter whether they stay home or they go and vote. We have to influence them by leading them to recognize that if we were to change the voting system, every single vote would count. No vote would be wasted, and the ultimate outcome will be a true reflection of what the people want.
Rather than right now everybody sitting down and looking at all of the smaller options and wishing they would come together like the Avengers, but we've found repeatedly that that forming parties for convenience of just for winning elections doesn't translate necessarily to good governance. And Timothy, I believe that you and well, pre I don't want to say what you suggested that was a course of action where the courts were concerned. But and you should be the one to say it, but I think that all of these smaller parties and all of these smaller people who, all of the groups in society that are not represented are actually being done a disservice. And I think that your suggestion is a correct one.
Yeah, under the present system, fragmented parties don't do themselves any justice. But really, we need to change the electoral system. And I think there can be a two-step entry towards better proportionality. One step forward can be you can succeed with a simple majority. It is not too far-fetched to believe that we can change the constitution for the better.
So all the politics that we engage in for the 5 years that we have a government should actually be all of those people in the parliament engaged in government conversation rather than throwing stones from outside the fort, engaged in politics for the whole 5 years, yes?
We tend, I mean, it's not only in Trinidad, but you tend, from this, you are out on the hustings until the next election, continually campaigning.
Indeed. Well, gentlemen, we're coming to the end of the road. So, Vade, let me let you go first. Give us your closing comments. Take as much time as you need. Let me say to you, thank you for always being available to be on the panel. And I know that the listeners enjoy you. I'm getting real good responses to Timothy Hamel-Smith too. So we're going to end up with our own little Avengers on this Plain Talk show regularly. Vade, give me your closing comments. Take as much time as you need.
Well, thank you. I've survived a bit of politics here. I feel a lot more comfortable in finance and banking. But looking at the problem of people not being represented, and I think it's a major issue where somebody says, a citizen said they don't like the two parties, but they don't know what to do, and they're forced to vote at this point in time. And I'm saying there are solutions for it. I don't have a problem with the slightly more complex things that Timothy said. We can put everything on the table, and at the end of the day, I believe in incremental changes that will make major changes to the governance of this country and give people hope, so that parties like ONR, NAR, COP, they would still be in existence today if they knew they had a representative in even the Senate. They would still be in existence today, but they come up like mushrooms every 5 years and they disappear overnight. And I'm saying that a large chunk of Trinidad is not represented, and that will keep the main parties on their toes. It'll keep the main parties on their toes. In fact, hopefully they can buy into it as well and make that an election promise. I don't see, if you make that an election promise, how the voters will say, no, we don't want something like that, So I think, as we discussed, I think our objective is the same, is to make Trinidad and Tobago a better place in light of shrinking economic times.
Thanks a lot, Vade. Former Senate President Timothy Hamel-Smith, please give us your closing comments on this show. You get to take as much time as you need to make your point.
Yeah, I think my starting point is to say that really our electoral system is discriminatory. It disenfranchises 30% of your population. And what we're aiming at is getting more participation. And maybe it is that if people felt their vote counted, that weren't wasted, then in fact we would get to the 100% without compelling them by law to. And I think there is room for carrying this message across the country. As I say, I think for that opportunity for carrying a message through electronic means. But And go back to when Dr. Williams started, he went on an education campaign. He didn't just go into the PNM. And if we persuade people that in all if I suppose the starting point is, are you satisfied with where we are in Trinidad and Tobago? If you are not satisfied, if you think something needs to change, then let's focus on what needs to change and how that will occur. And I'm suggesting that part of that, one component of it, is to change the electoral system so that everyone's vote counts, no vote is wasted, and that we get the best representation possible, because the pool of people for draw your executive has now expanded, and not just among that tribal core of each of the parties, which unfortunately nobody can claim that we're doing well, and we're going to face real challenges. We are facing real challenges. The challenges will deepen. The recession that is coming will be long and deep, and we will have to pull out every innovative step that we can make in order to cause transformation. And it will not just be a few that have to do that. We, all of the people, wherever you are, in whatever function you perform, to perform at your best, to achieve outcomes that will be for the benefit of you, your children, and your grandchildren, to get a better Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very, very much for that. And I want to say thank you to both of you, gentlemen, for joining us. And I know that the viewers and the listeners are very excited to hear conversations like this. They are too few, and we need to give them it a little bit more. So I'm hoping that I could tell you now and put you on notice that we're going to expand the panel, and we're going to have a part two, because all of the ideas that you're bringing up, people are going to ask, okay, what next? How do we go forward? How do we get this on the ground? So I think that those are going to be the questions the next time we get together. But thank you both very, very much for
Thanks
joining
for
us.
having us, Philip.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank
Lynn.
you.
All the
Thanks,
best. Stay
everyone.
safe, stay home,
Stay.
and be good.
Stay home, yeah, and that's good advice. Two brilliant minds, and Trinidad is awash with brilliant minds. And every time I look and I see how badly run this country is, and I know how many good people I know, and I know how many brilliant minds there are out there, I always ask the question, how do we end up being led by those least capable of leading us? There's a better country for Trinidad and Tobago, somewhere in an alternate dimension, real people, critical thinkers, patriots, civic minded. I mean, when you look at people, I could think, while Timothy was talking, I thought of Vernon de Lehman, Lincoln Myers, Raoul Pantin. I mean, there's so many people who went to their graves just giving of themselves and their lives for this country, that fought for a better version of Trinidad and Tobago, that could have easily sold their souls and gotten into either the PNM or the UNC, and exchanged their voices and their politics for financial gain, and they've stood their ground, and they've fought to the end of their road. And I think that it's sad that we, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, have never recognized that those people, the country that they would have given us, what they would have accomplished in our best interest, we keep losing it, and we lose it for spite. And we do that. We help those who attack anybody who tries to stand up for better Trinidad and Tobago. We assist them, we help them, we share their memes, we share their dirty jokes, the bacchanals, the character assassinations, the defamation, the victimization, is on and on and on. And that relay of nonsense, that needs to change. And if we want a better country, it's always going to come down to us. It's not what Jim is doing, and what Mary is doing, and what Sally is doing. It's what I am doing. What I'm doing with myself, what I'm doing with my time, how I contribute, how I try to contribute to my community, to my constituency, to my country. What I do with my vote, what I do with my labor, what I do with my consumption. The things that I give my attention to, all of those things, you know the old saying, what you focus on, that's what grows. What are we focusing on in Trinidad and Tobago that this is always the net outcome of our politics. And when will we take responsibility personally for this democracy and get us to a place where every creed and race could actually find an equal place, an expression space, a place to maximize full potential and grow forward. Trinidadians and Tobagonians are of the best and the brightest in the world. Trinis, we leave this country and we go abroad and we excel in fields that we have no access to. I watched Ato Bolan share today a Trini that went through horrific life circumstances. He was the 14th draft pick for the NFL. And I'm so proud and happy for him. And every time I see that, and I wonder, why does it take us having to escape Trinidad and Tobago to excel? And what can we do to turn that around? And the answer is always, we need to be the rising tide that lifts all boats. They say no one raindrop ever considers itself as having caused the flood. But each and every one of us are responsible for the state of affairs that is Trinidad and Tobago by what we do and what we fail to do. So we need to fix that. And this is, again, it'll never be about me. Politics is not my first love. It's not my last love. Politics is what I do out of wanting a better country for all of us. If you want a better place for yourself, for your family, for your loved ones, then stand up and stand with all the strong voices outside there that, again, could have sold themselves into the PNM and the UNC and try to maximize their political voices, but are instead fighting outside of those two parties for a better Trinidad and Tobago. Stand with them and give them some support. Recognize what it takes to be that. I don't know if we have any more shows for the weekend. We might take a break, but I do know that Monday, my brother Paul Elias Alexander, he's an epidemiologist, Dr. Paul Elias Alexander, will be joining us on the show to give us an update 30 days later where we are with coronavirus, COVID-19 worldwide. He's on the front line. He works with Canada Health, and the information that we'll be getting will be, cutting edge. So until then, stay safe, Trinidad and Tobago.